Hi, my name is Michael Gilmore and I'm the writer of Whizbang's blog and also one of the co-founders of ParkLogic.com, and it's great to have you here today as we take a look at week 3 and what's going on with the traffic monetization industry for domains, and also COVID-19 and the impact of that terrible situation which is gripping the world. And before we continue any further, I'd like to wish all the best for those people who are directly impacted, and also for our medical professionals all around the world. Our prayers and thoughts go with both groups during this terrible time. But anyway, without further ado, let me just flick across to my PC and we'll take a look at some of the charts I've been examining across the last couple of weeks. Okay then. All right. Okay. So COVID-19, the impact, and week 3. Looking at the normalized RPM and also RPM trends. Now, if you remember what a normalized RPM is, revenue divided by the traffic that ParkLogic sees times 1,000, versus the RPM is revenue divided by what our monetization partners count with all their filters and everything like that times 1,000. And the thing to notice is if you look at RPM, which is the red chart just there, and the ParkLogic RPM or normalized RPM is the blue line, you'll notice that they're definitely swinging around, continually their upward trend. In fact, the normalized RPM is accelerating upwards, and that can either be due to the way the traffic is counted, or also increase in revenue. Just so happens, I know that, for instance, during the last month, many of our clients have experienced like a 10-20% uplift in revenue. It really has gone upwards considerably. So that's the normalized RPM. The thing to pay attention to there is right at the end in that highlighted space, and that highlighted space shows you this last week's of data. Okay, so the earnings per click and click-through rates. This is an interesting one. So about mid-February, as we saw in the previous videos, we started getting a swing in earnings per click. Now, that, I must admit, has always continued to surprise me, because the thing I was trying to work out is what's driving this. When you hear people like Facebook saying, hey, they're giving an earnings warning because of decline in online advertising spend, and yet we're seeing right here an increase in earnings per click. Now, I wondered about this, and maybe it's the whole lot of the small businesses around the world are actually getting online, closing their brick and mortar shops, hoping to sell their products online in that sort of space. And I wouldn't be surprised that there's a lot of that happening. Like, people are just going online in masses and droves and so forth like that. And so you've got people like Netflix, for instance, who are reducing the quality back on their video streaming. Why? Because there's been such a huge upsurge and uptake in watching TV shows and so forth. So the thing I do notice is that there definitely has been a bit more of a step up in this last week, and you can see that in that highlighted area in the red line, which is the earnings per click. But the blue line has been a trend downwards in click-through rate. So maybe people were really excited about being online, working from home, and then suddenly they said, oh, I've seen those sort of park pages or something like that. So there's a trend going down. But except at the very end, there's been quite a step up in the last couple of days. And we typically see the earnings per click and also the click-through rates do counter-cyclical. In other words, as click-through rate goes up, earnings per click goes down, and vice versa. And that really tells me that a lot of earnings per click and click-through rate is almost fictitious. In fact, internally in ParkLogic, we pay very little attention to earnings per click and click-through rate, because they're so manipulated by either the advertising partners or something like that, or whatever. The only thing we really care about is that previous slide, which is the normalized RPM numbers. And we get that on a domain by domain basis. And that's how we do a lot of our optimization magic. But anyway, so it's worthwhile taking a look at those still, what's happening with earnings per click and click-through rate. So let's look at the overall volatility index. Now, to understand the volatility index, I've had some feedback from people saying I don't quite understand it. What I'm comparing is, say, this last Monday's data versus the previous Mondays, or this Tuesday's versus the previous Tuesday. Is it going up or is it going down? So anything above 100% means it's increasing. Anything below 100% means it's decreasing versus the previous week. So you can see here is that there was a massive upswing in an increase versus the previous week, from about the 17th of March. In this previous week, the increase has been reduced, but it's still increasing because it's above 100%. So you can see the last data points there are around about 108 or so, which means it's still increasing versus the previous week. So we don't see a contraction at all in the industry on week comparisons, which I find is fascinating. So there is still that surge in getting online demand and so forth like that for traffic, which is good news for all those traffic monetizers out there. Okay, so where is it all going? And as we've seen before, there's this constant battle between Google and direct sources, and right now Google is winning the battle. It has 65% of the revenue is won by Google-backed companies versus 35%, which is from direct advertising sources. Yeah, so there is that constant tussle between the both of them, but even still, is the 35%, we've seen it cross over at times, even at the 50% level. 60% was direct advertisers. So it'll be interesting to see what happens moving forward between these two. Okay, so the last week really hasn't seen much of a change. It's fairly stable in many respects. So what's going on with the separation of direct advertisers versus, say, Google backed companies? And you can see there where we'll look at the normalized RPM once again, and so we can do a direct comparison. And you can see the PL RPM direct is in red, so the direct advertisers, and Google's in blue. Now, don't get confused here. The red is using the right-hand axis, the blue is using the left-hand axis. So Google is actually paying a lot less than direct advertisers, but they pay across the breadth of advertisers, so they're a great big breadth. So don't forget that. So even though Google's paying less, they paid on more different types of traffic versus the direct advertisers have picked out various market verticals and they've really honed in on those. So couple of things that I noticed that Google definitely has taken a step up this past week. They really surged upwards, and so has the direct advertisers continued to surge forward. But it's quite choppy still. I was surprised by the choppiness of the Google spike around the 27th of March, and that's a period of time. Then it dropped away and then came back up again and so forth. So I was surprised by that. But we'll see how it actually pans on. The thing I'm looking for, and I'm just waiting to get data on, is the first week of April. Why is that so important? The reason why is because the first week of April is going to be the new quarter's budgets for the advertising companies, and whether this whole sort of crunch on the industry in general is actually going to impact the online industry as much. And we're going to see that across this coming week, whether we see a complete fall away in earnings per click rates and normalized RPM. I really hope that doesn't happen. It would be fantastic if all those small businesses, when have come online now, have really begun to bolster those numbers upwards and kept them going forward. And they could end up being our savior. So we'll just see how it occurs. Back in 2008, we we all saw a downturn, but this is a very different scenario. This is not initially it was not an economic downturn, it was a health downturn, which became an economic downturn. So it'll be interesting to see what occurs there and whether that's going to impact things this coming week. So hold on for the ride. This coming week's going to be a real challenge, I think. Okay, so volatility. Wow. So the direct advertisers are once again above 100%. Means they're still increasing, just reduced rates. And you can see there the reduced rates has fallen back dramatically for the direct advertisers, but they're still pushing upwards, which is good. So we haven't seen anything below the 100% mark, when indicating a contraction at all. So once again, I'm looking forward to this further week. Now, we've contacted many of our partners with ParkLogic and to find out, are they still seeing some future bookings of advertising put in place? And they said that industries like the travel industry, like hotels, flight bookings and everything, has completely collapsed. But other industries have stepped into the gap, which is quite interesting. So I really want to see what's going to be occurring there. Like if you're in the video conferencing industry, online video conferencing, let me tell you right now that it is booming, is absolutely booming for you. So there's those sort of areas, or online education. Online education is just taking off. I think we're at a time where it's going to be a really, it's a big change for the world. In fact, yeah, so when I look at what's occurring here, is that it's almost like a 9/11 event globally for business and also for society in general. It's one of those watershed moments where people, for instance, will get used to working from home. Businesses will get used to their personnel working from home, and like I wouldn't want to be holding space in some of these skyscrapers and things like that, because I think they're going to empty of people as businesses realize that they can actually operate in a virtual environment and actually work quite well for them. Many of those businesses. So those sort of things will change. I think the delivery services are going to be just booming, like UPS, FedEx, and so forth like that are just going to be taking off as more people order things online, order items, and they get used to. I know in Australia here that a lot of the online grocery services have like been inundated with people wanting to buy online, get all their food and everything like that. And once that's in place, I think people just get used to it. And then you've got to wonder, well, why do we have these great big supermarkets and everything? Why don't we just have a warehouse? And as people order more and more stuff online. So I think we're at one of those tipping points where more and more is going to go online. That the issue for traffic monetization is whether we're going to see that continuing to convert anyway, to higher revenue lines, or whether we're going to see it come off the edge of a cliff. And I think we'll know within the next week whether we see that sort of tip over and start to decline or not with those new budgets. So it's something that you must not miss the next video. I'm hanging out for it. I'm trying to get some forward projections and so forth of what's going on, and we'll find out next week. But the end of next week, if you remember, we run into Easter. So Easter is typically a downturn anyway. So what we then want to know is what happens after Easter, and so forth. It goes on and on. I know in Australia here, we're bracing as a nation for a 4 to 6 months lockdown period of really reduced economic activity and so forth. Now, does that reduction translate into a reduction of online? I don't think so, because like I said, more and more people going online. You may have noticed that in some instances, we've seen anyway, is that to do a video conference or anything like that during peak times of usage, it can get a bit slow, or it gets not as good quality and so forth like that. And I think that many of the telcos are beginning to sort of gear up the extra bandwidth and light up dark fiber and so forth. But we live in a very uncertain time, but no more uncertain than for those people that are impacted by the virus of COVID-19. And also for all those medical professionals. Like the stats coming out right now is that 10% of medical professionals are getting this horrible, horrible disease. And that's really high. Like they're right in the front line. They're the troops. And I look at people that I know of who are nurses, and like my daughter's training to be a nurse, and I think they're going to be on the front line on this, and for quite some time ahead. So my heart, and like I said, and my prayers go out for all the nurses and doctors out there and the medical professionals who are wrestling with this, particularly for those in, like, you look at the numbers coming out of Spain and Italy and everything. It's just terrible. It's heart-wrenching. And then we have, I think Donald Trump saying that it'll be a victory if 250,000 Americans pass away because of COVID-19. I'm thinking, 250,000? That's a victory? Wow. It's like, it's frightening. And I think above all else, we should place the sanctity of life above the sanctity of dollars. So in amongst all these numbers I look at and everything like that, which are very important because they allow us to pay mortgages and that sort of thing and put food on the table for our families, we mustn't lose sight and continue to be grateful for the fact that our family is sitting there at the table with us. But anyway, be safe, wash your hands, practice great hygiene, be very careful about all that you do, and I'll look forward to talk to you next week of what's going on with COVID-19 and domain monetization. Anyway, thanks a lot for that. Bye. Hi, I hope you enjoyed that video and that you find this information that I'm providing through my blog and through these videos really interesting. Don't forget, subscribe, whatever you subscribe, so you don't miss out on the next installment I'm going to be releasing. Or you can click on the push alerts on the website. So either two, but anyway, thanks a lot. Bye.